On rare occasions, the very mysteries that bind us find an unlikely solution, bringing closure to enigmas that once haunted us. These solved cases can either bring solace to loved ones or anger to take its place. Number 10. Jonal Pierre White was born and raised in New Orleans, but decided to leave his hometown to settle in Ruston, Louisiana. Having lettered in both football and track at Ruston High School for 3 years, he then played 2 seasons at Jones County Junior College in Mississippi. From there, he would start his career as part of the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, playing with the team for the next 2 seasons. At the age of 32 years old, in 2023, Jonal was in the process of completing his bachelor's degree before making the decision to move to Houston, Texas. Unfortunately, he would never get the opportunity to complete his degree, because on the 1st of June, he would spark off a clue-lacking mystery. That day, Jonal stepped onto a Greyhound bus in Grambling. It was bound for Houston, Texas, where he was allegedly going in search of job opportunities. The former football coach did reach his destination, and for a few weeks he remained in contact with his family. But suddenly, all that communication abruptly stopped, and Jonal had enigmatically disappeared. The family soon reported him missing to the Houston authorities, who immediately prompted an investigation, and they discovered that the missing man had used his laptop and Wi-Fi to stay in contact with his family, and specifically, he was using Facebook Messenger. But despite an initial inquiry into the abrupt disappearance, investigators found no signs that anything was amiss. There was no indication of foul play, or an accidental event, or incarceration. The missing man had left virtually no clues behind when he disappeared, leaving authorities at a loss. Months would pass by before a single trace of Jonal would surface. It came in the form of activity on his bank account. After some investigating, the family found that it came from Missouri City, Texas. The activity, though, was the account being placed in overdraft and subsequently closed. In the next few months, relatives would make several trips to Houston, where they distributed flyers and searched for any leads they could find. They even hired a private detective to aid them in the investigation. But even so, no traces of Jonal were found anywhere. The family was forced to accept they may never see him again. Their hope was drained, and all that was left to do was continue with their lives. Then, just when they thought that Jonal was gone forever, there was a sudden revelation. On the 5th of December 2024, more than a year after he went missing, the 33-year-old was found by the Gonzales County Sheriff's Office. Officers had responded to reports of a man wandering along Texas 304, appearing to be disoriented. When they arrived in the area, they found Jonal, who was verbally unresponsive and unwilling to identify himself. After searching his belongings, the deputies discovered his identification card, and a quick search online brought up several missing person reports. The next day, Jonal's family would receive the long-awaited news. He was alive after all. Number 9. The year was 1958 in Sydney, Australia. Daphne Pearl Hempstead was living with her husband and 8 children on Cowpasture Road in Bosley Park in the western suburbs. Daphne adopted the surname Hempstead after marrying a local boy, Sydney, back in 1936. From there, they would go on to have several children together, including Leslie, Patricia, Daphne, Barry, Clifford, Helen, Marcia, and Janet. By the mid-50s, the family would settle down on a property known to locals as Crosby's Dairy Farm. As time went on, though, the white picket fence dream would be shattered. Sydney was already beginning to exhibit jealousy and a love for his wife to the point of obsession. Court documents revealed that he often got enraged and sometimes assaulted her. Nonetheless, Daphne remained with him and continued to raise her children while she took up a job as a chef. On the 10th of May, 1958, though, things for the Hempsteads were about to change. That morning, they awoke to find that Daphne was nowhere to be seen. Believing that she may have gone to work early, they weren't immediately concerned. Hours flew past, and soon it was late afternoon with no sign of Daphne returning. It was then that concern began to dominate the household, and anger took hold of Sydney. Darkness fell, and he put the children to bed, hoping that his wife would be walking in any minute. What could have happened to her? Was she met with foul play? Was she involved in some sort of accidents? The possibilities were plentiful. Eventually, Sidney had to retire too, hoping his wife would be there in the morning. The 11th of May came, but Daphne was still nowhere to be seen. And just then, 2 letters arrived in the mail, telling an unexpected story that left the Hampsteads shattered. The 39-year-old began the letter to her husband with, "My darling Sid, what is costing me to write you this letter you will never know." She went on to explain that she felt as though there was no love left for her at home and that she'd be going away. The second letter was addressed to her children, in which Daphne instructed them to always look out for one another. And that was that. The woman was gone, and where she ended up would remain an enduring mystery for the family. At least, it would remain as such for several decades. In 2012, a renewed inquiry tried to determine what happened to Daphne. It was presumed that she was no longer alive by this time, but no one could determine when or how she came to pass. One of the missing woman's grandchildren was much too intrigued to give up that easily, so she hired a private investigator named Luke Athens, and soon the disappearance and fate of Daphne began to unravel. The private investigator soon discovered that the woman who had disappeared all those years ago before had led an adventurous life. It turns out that on the 10th of May, 1958, Daphne got up just before dawn, packed up her things, and left the property. No one else in the home was awake at this hour, which means that no one would have seen her leave. From there, she headed to Queensland and changed her name to Daphne Pearl Oswald. She would also modify the date on her birth certificate, leaving her 6 years younger. In Queensland, she would fall in love with a plantation owner named Roy Shaw and use his surname. Roy passed away in 1972, and Daphne soon caught the eye of Raymond Charles Jones, whose surname coincidentally was that of Daphne's maiden name. She ultimately began to go by this name too, and became the stepmother of her new partner's children. The missing woman would remain in this relationship until Raymond's passing. While the investigator was able to determine that Daphne had ultimately started a whole new life elsewhere and lived life to its fullest, one question still remained. What happened to her? It turns out she lived quite a lengthy life, passing away in 2007 at the age of 89, and no one knew of her sinister secret. Number 8. It was 2020 when fisherman Roland Visbal and his friend headed a few kilometers off the coast of Puerto Colombia. As they readied themselves for a day of hard work, one of them spotted something off in the distance. At first, they thought it was a log and took precautions to steer clear of it. But as the fishermen drew closer to the strange object, they happened upon an unsettling sight. Bobbing up and down in the water was no log, but rather a person. Roland began to call out to the individual, who appeared to be in and out of consciousness and unable to communicate. Despite his efforts in both English and Spanish, there was no response. The two decided to take a closer look and steered the boat right up to the rubber ring. In it lay a woman, somewhat unresponsive and in desperate need of medical attention. Roland pulled her onto the boat, called the police, and brought the woman to shore. On shore, she was sitting in a chair and given some water as bystanders tried to get her name. The unidentified woman was subsequently taken to the hospital to receive treatment. It was here that she would finally identify herself as Angelica Gaitan, a 46-year-old woman who disappeared from Barranquilla 2 years earlier. Her family was swiftly notified and came to her side when they were told where she was. Then, the alarming story of where she was for the past 2 years began to unravel. According to Angelica, 2 years ago, in September 2018, she went missing, intentionally, hoping to allegedly escape an abusive relationship. After leaving Barranquilla, she wandered the streets for 6 months before finally coming to the doors of the women's office. She told them of the alleged abuse she had faced, and protection measures were subsequently put in place in an effort to keep her ex-partner at bay. 2 years later, in 2020, she was informed that she needed to leave the establishment because it was discovered that the ex was no longer residing in the area. Distraught and with no place to go, Angelica headed to the seashore by herself for some solitude. At some point, the woman decided to head into the waves, where she was carried out further and further into the sea. Allegedly, she would spend 8 hours floating in the ocean, drifting towards Puerto Colombia. Angelica's daughters, though, dispute her claims, alleging that no such ill treatment occurred and that she simply vanished from the family 2 years prior without any explanation. Regardless of why she disappeared, the family was relieved that she was found alive and could now receive the help she needed. Number 7. A 2007 Chevrolet HHR with a North Carolina license plate parked in a remote area of Death Valley was a mark of something sinister. It had been there for quite some time, in the area that was frequented by campers in the winter months. When the Inyo County Sheriff's Office was called to the national park in early February of 2025, they discovered that the ominously abandoned vehicle belonged to Kelsey Pitman, who'd mysteriously vanished the year before. It was in November of 2024 when the 33-year-old last had contact with her family, prompting them to report her missing to the Bishop, California, Inyo County Sheriff's Office. They later discovered that she'd last been seen in St. George, Utah on the 2nd of December before her whereabouts became shrouded in mystery. Despite the initial searches, they came up empty-handed. When the car was found in February of this year, it was discovered to be that of Kelsey's, and the search for the missing woman was renewed. Police officers flocked to the surrounding area, thoroughly searching the grounds, only to come up empty-handed once more. No evidence was found in or around the vehicle to point them in the right direction. Death Valley is located some 260 miles, 4 hours away from St. George, where Kelsey was last seen. The discovery prompted some serious considerations that asked whether or not the missing woman was the one who drove it there. If it was she who made her way to Death Valley, she'd entered one of the most treacherous and extreme national parks in the United States. Staying true to its name, the park is renowned for its record-breaking heat, being the driest national park in the United States, and serving as a refuge for a diverse array of wildlife, including coyotes. Although her family had reported her missing months earlier, Kelsey's case wasn't added to the NamUs database until May of 2025. The disappearance was suddenly back in the spotlight, with police appealing to the public for any information. The woman's mother even became more involved in the investigation, insisting on anything law enforcement needed. She explained that her daughter was known to use several aliases, including Infinity Jane and Jane Jones. Following the discovery of the vehicle, though, Kelsey's case ran cold again, even after the months-long search efforts included several law enforcement agencies, drones, cadaver dogs, volunteers, and search and rescue personnel. It did come about, though, that the camping area where the car was found was known as Slab City to the locals and served as an alternative community, described as a drifter's utopia. From February until mid-June, the hunt for Kelsey continued until efforts were finally suspended. They'd made no progress with the investigation, leaving the family shattered and searching for answers. Then, most unexpectedly, and just a few months after the search was stopped, something incredible happened. On the 22nd of July, 2025, Kelsey Pitman was found alive and safe in Colorado, almost 13 hours away from where her car was found. Although no information was revealed about the nature of her discovery, the mystery was at least partially solved. Number 6. In 1986, the young Rick Hazelton had dreams of a music career and decided to leave his hometown of Glens Falls, New York to achieve it. The 23-year-old had high hopes, ones that required him to leave his old life behind. Growing up, his friends would wish him the best, hoping to hear from their beloved friend sometime in the near future. But that day would never come, and instead, Rick would leave a mystery in his wake. After leaving Glens Falls, he dropped off the face of the earth, and no one would hear from him for decades. After some years, his family would eventually declare him legally deceased, though it's unclear if a missing person report was ever filed. To those who once knew him, though, Rick was no longer alive, but not everyone believed that he was gone. One childhood friend, Brian Penchian, never gave up hope, and if his friend was truly deceased, he wanted to know how, when, and where. Brian was a retired Fort Edward police officer who, for several years, attempted to locate Rick, but was unsuccessful. His searches then began to drift into the John Doe archives from across the country. He didn't find any luck there either. But amid the search in the cold cases, he happened upon a sketch that looked incredibly similar to that of his lost friend. After enlisting the aid of a Nashville, Tennessee detective, Brian and the rest of his friends were in for quite the shock. 33 years after Rick mysteriously fell out of contact with friends, and some decades after being declared legally deceased, It turned out he was alive. Some weeks after the discovery of the sketch, the detectives were able to track the missing man down to Salem, Oregon, 3,000 miles away. One day, a letter slid through the letter plate of a home in Salem, the home of Rick Hazelton. The man, who now had a wife and 2 children, picked it up, only to discover he was being investigated in a missing person report. Initially, he thought it was some kind of mistake. He couldn't be missing. Then, 2 weeks later, the police came knocking. After a brief exchange of letters and phone numbers, Brian would receive one surprising phone call. He picked it up, and on the other end of the line was a voice that rendered him colorless. It was as though he was talking to a ghost. Rick explained that he didn't think anyone really cared for him, so he just headed out and made his own life, forgetting about his past. For the next few hours, the friends chatted away, reminiscing about their childhood memories. Finally, the missing and declared deceased titles could be removed after all this time. Rick explained that after he disappeared from Glen Falls, he attempted to become a street performer. In its failure, he then just headed to Miami before catching an inexpensive flight to Colorado. The formerly missing man explained that without social media or a cell phone, he'd simply fallen out of touch with his family and friends. Number 5. By 2022, Erica Ann Johnson, originally from St. Louis, Missouri, had been married, had 2 children, and were divorced. That same year, she would take up residence in a room near 621 Cape Coral Parkway East in Cape Coral, Florida. She began working as a housekeeper for the Best Western Plus Beach Resort in Fort Myers Beach. It would be from this job that the 36-year-old would leave at 4:30 p.m. on the 5th of July, the very start of an intense mystery. After clocking out, Erica was dropped off by a coworker near the Bell Shop Towers shopping center in Fort Myers. She then headed to a bus stop where she was captured on surveillance camera, climbing onto a bus. She was spotted again on CCTV, getting off the bus at the Cape Coral Transit Center bus station around 5:37 p.m. The following day at 7 a.m., she would message her ex-husband. Erica told him that she would need to cancel the plans with her 2 children, claiming that she needed to work. 2 days after that, she was seen on CCTV again at the Cape Coral Transit Center bus stop in the early morning hours. She was seen carrying a few bags, a bunny cage, and a traveling pillow. Erica got onto the bus at 5:21 a.m. The next sighting of the woman occurred just a few hours later when she was seen boarding another bus headed for Tampa. After this, Erica's whereabouts are left shrouded in mystery. A few days passed before the family decided to file a missing person report when they couldn't make contact with her. Calls to her cell phone went straight to voicemail. The report was made on the 14th of July, 2022, leading to an investigation that allowed detectives to piece together the woman's last known movements. They managed to track her to the Greyhound bus stop in Tampa, but couldn't determine where she went from there. Authorities decided to then head to Erica's home, hoping to find clues there. They discovered a bin full of clothing, a small couch, a blue bicycle, and a backpack. Her neighbors alleged that a week prior to her disappearance, she was seen carrying a black suitcase around. It was discovered that Erica had no bank account, vehicle, or social media presence, each of which made it all the more difficult to locate her. The months began to drift by, with the missing woman being declared missing and endangered. Her face dominated missing person posters as she hoped that someone had seen something, but no tips would materialize. But then, in the most unexpected twist, almost a year after she disappeared, on the 27th of May, 2023, the Cape Coral police made an announcement. They revealed that Erica Johnson had been found in Ohio, confirming she was alive and safe. Though the mystery of her whereabouts was solved, questions still lingered in the case. The police offered no further details, leaving many to wonder about the nature of the vanishing and whether it was intentional. Number 4. The first sign that something was wrong in Tori Milsack's life came in September of 2023 when she abruptly stopped communicating with her family. They couldn't figure out why she would stop all contact, and their concern only grew increasingly as the days went by. At the time, the 34-year-old was living on Edgewood Street in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where she seemingly retreated after experiencing some mental health issues. Even though they hadn't spoken to her in a while, the family didn't report Tori missing. knowing that she had a history of issues with emotional well-being. So they waited patiently. The woman's brother, though, gave in to the concern, and in May of 2024 he visited her. He discovered that Tori was showing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, though he couldn't determine the reason behind the sudden onset, nor did he report her condition to the appropriate authorities. Her brother didn't know it then, but this would be the last time he would see his sibling for a while. A month after he visited Tori, she would enigmatically disappear. It was the 6th of June when she was last seen at her Edgewood Street home before vanishing into oblivion without a parting goodbye. 2 months would go by without any communication or sightings, ultimately leading to a missing person report being filed with the Hot Springs Police Department. Law enforcement focused on Tori's digital footprint, but found that there was no activity on her credit cards, nor had she been active on her cell phone or computer. They soon began to fear the worst outcome in this case, prompting a rise in fear. The family initiated ground searches and served as the driving force behind the search efforts. They also began looking into the possibility of hiring a private investigator. The months were dragging on with no clues surfacing that may point the authorities in the right direction. Missing person posters filled the streets, but no sightings were reported. Tori had seemingly drifted into the void. Soon, the family found themselves commemorating the first-year anniversary of the day they lost Tori, a time in which hope was beginning to dwindle. But then, just days later, on the 19th of June 2025, there was a revelation. It was on that day that the missing woman had walked into a gas station in Little Rock, Arkansas, headed straight for an employee, and identified herself as Tori Milsack and explained she'd been missing for more than a year. The employees notified the police, who arrived at the store to confirm the woman's identity. Turned out she really was Tori, and she mysteriously popped up just as mysteriously as she had vanished. She explained she'd run away from home and had a warrant out for her arrest in Garland County, though it never stipulated as to what the warrant was for or why she decided to turn up a year later. Number 3. When Petra Pazsitka failed to show up at her brother's birthday party on the 26th of July in 1984, fears immediately rushed over the family. The 24-year-old was a computer science student who left her home in Braunschweig, Germany to attend a dentist appointment, with a birthday party scheduled for later that afternoon. Her absence cast a shadow over Germany, and her parents promptly reported her missing to the local authorities. The response was swift, and the police were on the case immediately, utilizing every resource to track the woman down. Eventually, they discovered that she'd gone to a bus stop, but after this, the trail ran eerily cold. Relatives, maintaining that the sudden departure was uncharacteristic of Petra, suggested that there must have been a deranged maniac on the loose. This was the only reasonable explanation they could come up with, as they did not believe she would just abandon them. For years, they insisted that the college student didn't leave of her own accord, urging police to investigate the matter further, hoping to reveal their daughter's slayer. 3 years went by, with seemingly no answers materializing. Then, in 1987, a harrowing confession sealed Petra's fate. A 19-year-old convicted felon, Gunter K., told investigators that he was the one behind the slaying of the missing woman. He alleged that he'd discarded her body in a nearby river, but no remains belonging to Petra had ever been located. Despite the lack of evidence, the young woman would be declared deceased just 2 years later, and her case was closed. Family, friends, and peers mourned the day. For over 3 decades, they felt the unforgiving pain. They had no closure, no last goodbye, as Petra was ripped away from them. The years passed and the case gradually fell out of the public eye, only resurfacing on mystery blogs and missing person databases. Then, the most unlikely of twists. In September of 2015, this supposedly resolved incident resurfaced, and it had quite the revelation. It was that year when police were responding to a report of a burglary in Dusseldorf, Germany. They arrived at the scene of the crime, which was the home of 55-year-old Mrs. Schneider. When the woman couldn't produce an identification card, the police were forced to turn their attention away from the crime. Instead, they would question Mrs. Schneider about her identity, ultimately unraveling one of the most enduring mysteries that was thought to have already been solved. The woman explained that the name on the door was not hers, and she was actually Petra Pazsitka. The the woman who disappeared 31 years ago from Braunschweig, the very woman that Gunter K. admitted to slaughtering. It turned out Petra wasn't the victim of a maniac at all, but rather confessed to orchestrating her own disappearance. Number 2. Petra Pazsitka wasn't the only person to have been declared deceased, only to emerge some 3 decades later. Arthur Jones's story serves as another mystery that instilled grief and heartache in his loved ones, only to discover that it was all his own doing. It was the 10th of May, 1979, when the Chicago broker flung the front door open around noon. He told his wife he'd be back later that day, claiming he had a business meeting to attend. But apparently, said meeting required him to wear the most casual of outfits, a tennis shirt and some slacks. It was clear to his wife Joanne, who'd been married to him for the past 2 decades, that this was not corporate attire. She sensed something was amiss with their husband. He'd left in quite a panic, forgetting to put on his most cherished bracelet. As Arthur sped away from their suburban home, he shouted out, realizing that his outfit was unfitting, that the meeting would not be held in an office. Joanne went about her daily routine, waiting for her husband to return, anxiety bubbling up with each passing hour. Eventually, darkness fell, and Arthur was still nowhere to be seen. The very next day, the distraught woman headed for the police department and reported the 40-year-old missing. Realizing the urgency of the situation, investigators prompted an immediate search, and it didn't take them long to come across the first set of clues. At the O'Hare International Airport was Arthur's silver Buick, abandoned, with only a pair of sunglasses left behind. This was the only trace of the man that the police would ever uncover. Unfortunately, they could bring no good news home to Joanne, who eagerly awaited answers. A few years would go by without so much as a hint that Arthur was still alive. So, in 1986, the court declared him legally deceased, and Social Security awarded his family $47,000 in survivor benefits. Mike Studo, a special agent, worked the case, concluding that Arthur may have fallen victim to foul play and possibly some organized crime based on the gambling debts he allegedly accumulated. Halfway across the country and some decades later, though, a nurse at a VA hospital, Cliff Goodenough, was gathering some clues of his own. For the last 2 decades, he'd been in a battle with the IRS, claiming that bogus income had been appearing on his Social Security earnings, supposedly from a Las Vegas casino. Year after year, tens of thousands of dollars were showing up on his account, but Cliff had never been to Las Vegas, nor did he work in a casino or gamble. In 2004, Cliff finally made headway when the IRS confirmed that someone else was using his tax ID number, and their name was listed as Joseph Sendelli. In an independent search, the nurse found a phone number for the man and began having a few conversations with him. Sendelli had some pretty odd stories to tell, even suggesting there'd been a mix-up at the post office, leading to the Social Security confusion. Cliff didn't buy it, and instead enlisted professional help, and what they would uncover was something truly unexpected. After much investigation and several more years, the authorities were able to track down the man who called himself Sendelli. In Las Vegas, they found the individual who was about to solve the Arthur Jones mystery once and for all. Sendelli identified himself as 72-year-old Arthur Jones, the same man who disappeared back in 1979. It's believed that Arthur was tied up in some pretty dangerous business with the mob, leading him to sprint off from his home all those years ago to ensure his safety and survival. Number 1. Rachel Lloyd had graduated from North Carolina State University in December of 2015. The following year, the 22-year-old found herself in New Zealand, where her adventures at Massey University began. In May of 2016, Rachel's mother, 45-year-old Carolyn, decided to make the trip to Australia to spend some time with her daughter. Unbeknownst to both of them, this visit would be the start of a harrowing ordeal. Upon arriving in New Zealand, Carolyn and Rachel planned to go on a one-day hike, making the most of their time together. Their endeavor would take place in Tarara Forest Park on the North Island. The park is renowned for its rugged terrain, steep drop-offs, and dense bushland, posing a challenging hike for beginners, often dominated by severe weather and gale-force winds. Although they were experienced hikers, neither Rachel nor Carolyn was familiar with this forest. But they decided to stick to the trails, specifically the Kappa Kappa Nui track, so they could make it back home in time for dinner. Except this isn't what happened. At some point during the hike, the pair got turned around, leaving them lost and stranded somewhere within the dense bush. Some hours passed, and the park rangers realized that the 2 hikers who checked in that day were unaccounted for. Soon, rescue teams would be arriving, and the hunt for the now missing duo was on. Ground searches were carried out, and helicopters whipped overhead, but neither could find any trace of the missing woman. Family and friends eagerly awaited the news, but days passed with no revelations. By now, the mission was turning critical. Rachel and Carolyn would be without food, and their access to water was likely limited. Freezing temperatures and severe weather could make survival all the more difficult. The hope of finding them alive was beginning to dwindle by day 5, but it would be that very day that one rescue helicopter spotted something out of the ordinary on the ground, and it was a word, made from brown branches sticking out of the surrounding green grass and trees. The word was an ominous "help," signaling that someone was in need of assistance. Could it be the very people they'd been in search of for almost a week? It turned out it was. The helicopter landed and more teams rushed to the area, where they found the mother and daughter duo huddled together and in need of medical attention. They were airlifted to the hospital, Rachel almost on her way out, and Carolyn concerned only for her daughter's well-being. It had been several days in harsh conditions, leaving many wondering how the 2 had survived. Investigators would discover that the 2 had been heading along a trail when they became lost, and after finding blue markers, they believed they were back on track and continued their hike, thinking the path would take them out of the forest. But those blue markers were being used for possum tracking, not to mark a trail. Darkness soon fell, and the hikers were left with no choice but to settle in the forest and hope for the best. They huddled together for warmth and rationed their supplies, not knowing how long they'd be lost. At some point, Rachel had sustained a head injury, leaving her unable to walk, and her health was deteriorating each day. Carolyn would have to carry her daughter on her back whenever they decided to move, hoping to find another hiker to help them. A few days in, their food became limited, and the mother was forced to watch her daughter slowly succumb to the elements. The help sign and arrow marking their location, though, served as the beginning of their rescue, and just in the nick of time. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.